Okay. Recently, I've found out that the SEC has reached out to four teams, and you have them on your screen: Clemson, Ohio State, Florida State, and Michigan. Clemson and Florida State being from obviously the ACC, and Ohio State and Michigan from the Big Ten. This would create college football's first, not super conference, but mega conference. The way that they're going about this. If they added Oklahoma, Texas, Clemson, Florida State, Ohio State, and Michigan, that would create a 20-team mega conference. I mean, that's beyond a super conference. That's beyond having more than two or one or two elite teams in your conference. That's having six, seven, eight elite teams in your conference. That is interesting. I mean, Clemson being the powerhouse that they are, making the playoffs, like so many years already, winning two national titles, Ohio State winning the first college football playoff, and being in the playoff a lot of years, Michigan, Florida State being a good team that's on the rise after their title in 2014. It's it. I don't know if it's a good idea. I mean, it's my opinion. No one asked for it, but I'm giving it to you. Alabama. You have in the SEC. You have Alabama, Georgia, Florida, LSU, Auburn. Then you have Ole Miss, who is on the rise to being a threat. Missouri, who is a threat every once in a while. Tennessee, who used to be a threat. You have all these teams in the SEC that are all are elite and competitive, and they fight. And you're thinking of adding Oklahoma, Texas, Clemson, Ohio State, Michigan, and Florida State. In my opinion, this would ruin college football. This would ruin it. I mean, that would be harder for teams to make the playoff. You would have teams that have one, two, three, four losses getting into the playoffs. How would you work out a conference title game if you did that? A conference title game would be, I mean, irrelevant at the point. I mean, if you're if you're about trying a 16 team playoff, the SEC conference schedule would be the 16 or 20 team playoff. I mean, if you went undefeated in the SEC, there's no doubt about it. You are getting in the playoffs at the number one spot. If you go undefeated in this supposable 20 team mega conference, you are having that number one spot, and it is probably likely that you are going to win the playoff because what other elite team that you have that could be opposing you? If you get a rematch with one of your SEC opponents, or you get Oregon from the Pac-12, or you get Notre Dame from whatever conference they might be in, probably the ACC. I mean, the Big 10, 12 probably not being there. Uh, Cincinnati, the only other good team I can think of, who would beat you if you go undefeated in that environment? You would not come. You would probably come out winning the national title. If you have to play Clemson, Ohio State, Florida State, Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas, uh, Georgia, Florida, LSU, Auburn, if you have to play those teams, if you have to play even a group of those teams, a handful of those teams, and you go undefeated, you're probably winning the national title. Let's talk about Clemson first. Clemson being the powerhouse to the ACC. They are to the ACC of what Alabama is to the SEC. Clemson has their reign over the ACC, and they rule it with an iron fist. No one, I mean, hardly anybody gives them a competition. Oh, North Carolina, every couple of years they get to play because they're in opposite divisions. Um, they give them a little scare. Occasionally, Miami's on the rise, but we saw how that goes. Miami last year got dominated by Clemson. Boston College gave Clemson a good game last year, but I don't understand if Boston College could make a run for the ACC. Clemson, they have ruled the ACC since Florida State's downfall. Florida State was the only thing standing in Clemson's way for them to take control of the ACC. And ever since Florida State fell off the map, Clemson's stood their ground. They've stayed at that spot and they have not moved. If they moved to the SEC, that would be double or triple the competition that they have in the ACC. Because the only competition I can think of in the ACC for Clemson is Miami, North Carolina, maybe Boston College, maybe Virginia Tech. Florida State hasn't been competitive in since 2017. I just I don't see Clemson getting a better record if they move to the SEC. I mean, if they recruiting could really work out for Clemson if they do move to the SEC, but I don't see it happening because they'll start losing more games and people will be less interested in going to Clemson knowing that they have this environment that they have to play in. They have to play like Oklahoma, Texas, etc. They have to play all these teams, Alabama, Georgia. You don't want to play those teams, but if you go undefeated, it'll be better. I just don't see Clemson benefiting from this. They should stay in the ACC where it is. The ACC should stay out of this whole conference realignment and these movings. Florida State. Florida State, they fell off the map. I mean, I don't know what happened to them. They just won a national title in 2014 with Jameis Winston and Jimbo Fisher, who is now at Texas A&M. They won a national title just 7, 8 years ago, and they are now a 2, 3 win team. Last year, I think they had 3 wins, being against Duke, somehow North Carolina, and can't remember the other one, but or they won 2 games. Jacksonville State. Florida State going to the SEC with that environment that's being proposed would be worse for them. They would lose more games than they would if they stay in the ACC. Florida State's got a good head coach in Mike Norvell, and they've got good recruiting classes coming. I just don't see them benefiting, like I said, I don't see them benefiting as Clemson if going to the SEC. The SEC is a tough environment to play in. Already. You have Alabama, you have Georgia, Florida, LSU, etc. Like I said before. You're not going to benefit from this if you're Florida State. The Seminoles need a rebuild, a big one too. They should stay in the ACC, and if they want to join the SEC, it'll probably be a negative for them considering how bad they've been. Ohio State is in the mix as well. Like Ohio State is the dominator over the Big Ten, like Alabama is to the SEC. I This is a team that confuses me about this. Ohio State could dominate. Ohio State could dominate in the SEC considering their competition and how good Ohio State is. And Ryan Day's a good head coach. If Ohio State were to move to the SEC in this supposable environment and mega conference with 20 teams, they could possibly do good. They could give Alabama a run for their money. They could give Georgia a competition, Alabama, LSU. They could run for the title. I don't understand how title games would work in the SEC. I assume it'd be the same thing, or the top 2 teams, or how the pods would work. But Ohio State could do good. Ohio State's a really dominant team. Don't let the 52-24 performance in the national title fool you. No one was going to beat Alabama this year. No one. Ohio State was a really good team last year. You saw how their performance was against Clemson. You saw it. They are a good team. So Ohio State would have to keep their recruiting going, and I do think if they went to the SEC, it would benefit their recruiting. It would benefit it because they know they're already a good team. Clemson hasn't been as good as long as Ohio State has. So this move could benefit Ohio State depending on the situation. Michigan. Michigan kind of like Florida State, but not as bad, fell off the map. Michigan has not beat Ohio State in years. Jim Harbaugh is not a good head coach. He is going to get fired eventually. He is not. This could be the next year's could be his last year's there, but depending on how the situation goes, I don't. Michigan would not benefit from this at all. I know this has got to be one of the most obvious things. Michigan would get wins, obviously. Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi State. They would get wins like that. Georgia, Florida, LSU, Alabama. No. Michigan played Alabama in the Citrus Bowl 2 years ago, and it didn't work out. We saw how Michigan fared up against Alabama. Alabama was not that good that year. Alabama has not had that kind of year in a while under Nick Saban. And Alabama is good or better than Ohio State, Clemson, Texas, Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida, LSU. I mean, Michigan would not compete with those teams. They would completely get dominated. Unless Jim Harbaugh can get his stuff together and compete with these teams and beat the teams they're supposed to and take these top 10, top 5 teams down, then they're not going to be able to compete. They're not going to get the recruits they need to beat these teams. They need to start beating teams. And if they move to the SEC, they're going to make their downfall a lot quicker and a lot earlier. So I don't see Michigan benefiting from joining the SEC either. Anyway, that is my opinion. No one asked for it, but I don't care. This is my opinion. I'm giving it to you about the supposable 20-team SEC mega conference. It would be a good idea. It would be an extreme moneymaker for the Southeastern Conference. I mean, the Southeastern Conference would double, triple, quadruple. I don't know how much money they would make if they added all of these teams. These historic programs like Florida State with Bobby Bowden, with Clemson now with Dabo Swinney, Alabama with their just historic run and dynasties that lasted throughout the years with Bear Bryant and now Nick Saban with Gene Stallings, Michigan who is a historic program with tradition and history, Oklahoma also with history and tradition. Texas as well. I mean, if you added all these historic money making programs, the SEC would make so much more money. This is why I think they're doing it. It's money, obviously. The finances into this, like the SEC could advertise, like buy our licensing or TV programs, buy our rights. I mean, TV contracts being a lot worth a lot more considering the teams that you have to offer. The SEC would just make there's too much money involved for the SEC to not do this. Will they do it? I don't know. Should they do it? I don't think so. I don't think it would be a good idea for the SEC to do this. I just think it would ruin college football. Because it's good to have these Power 5 teams all over the place. Like the Big 12, who is about to implode, ACC with Clemson, SEC with Alabama, Georgia, um, Pac-12 with USC and Southern Cal, Oregon, Big 10 with Ohio State and Indiana, Penn State, Rutgers. It's just too much to make this mega conference. It would ruin college football. I don't think they should do it. It's my opinion. You probably don't care, but I'm not doing it. Anyway, this is my opinion. No one asked for it, and I'll see y'all in the next video.